Introduction: A Shadow in the Fog. October 1943. The Serpent's Throat Strait. A gray dawn finds the destroyer Smirch, adrift in a shroud of impenetrable fog. For 3 agonizing days, the crew has maintained absolute radio silence, their ship remaining completely dark, all lights extinguished to avoid detection. Every man aboard has been meticulously preparing the torpedo tubes for one, and only one singular devastating salvo. This was not a hunt in the conventional sense. They were not actively pursuing an enemy. Instead, they were waiting. This vivid, atmospheric opening plunges the reader into the profound despair that permeated the naval fleets during this critical period of the war. It simultaneously introduces the enigmatic and revolutionary figure of a commander who, through sheer necessity and unorthodox brilliance, utterly transformed the established rules of naval engagement. This section is designed to be deeply atmospheric, setting a somber and tense tone that will resonate throughout the entire article, hinting at the desperate circumstances that necessitated such a radical shift in wartime strategy. During the pivotal middle years of the Second World War, a particular naval strategy emerged as a relentless and devastating scourge against the Allied fleets: the coordinated group attacks by destroyers, infamously dubbed Wolfpack tactics. These swift and brutal assaults, often conducted under the cover of darkness or adverse weather, proved exceptionally effective in disrupting convoys and decimating naval formations. The established, standard methods of counteraction, which typically involved extensive patrols, radar sweeps, and coordinated air and surface attacks, frequently required an immense commitment of resources. More critically, these conventional responses were often implemented too late, failing to intercept the fast-moving enemy destroyers before they inflicted irreparable damage and then vanished back into the vastness of the ocean. The Allied navies found themselves in a precarious position, struggling to develop effective defensive and offensive strategies against an enemy that embraced speed, stealth, and overwhelming localized force. Amidst this prevailing sense of desperation and strategic vulnerability, hushed whispers began to circulate among the seafaring community. These tales spoke of a shadowy, almost mythical figure known only as the Gray Ghost, a commander whose ship, it was said, was utterly impossible to detect by any known means. His attacks were described with a chilling sense of awe, likened to sudden, devastating strikes of lightning emerging from an apparently clear and calm sky. This commander was a paradox, feared by his own forces for his extreme, unconventional demands and the psychological toll of his tactics, yet simultaneously respected for the undeniable, deadly efficacy of his methods. Conversely, he was intensely hated by the enemy, who found themselves increasingly on edge, constantly anticipating an unseen threat that defied all their intelligence and counter-tactics. The growing legend of the Gray Ghost was fueled by the inexplicable losses suffered by enemy vessels, further cementing his reputation as a master of unseen warfare, operating far beyond the conventional strictures of naval combat. Admiral Kilovolt Semenov, a notable figure of the era, profoundly articulated the core flaw in the conventional naval mindset of the time, a perspective he later captured in his insightful memoirs. His reflection highlighted a critical strategic misstep. We were not losing because our ships were worse. We were losing because we thought like them. Someone had to start thinking differently. This powerful quote underscores the intellectual rigidity that characterized naval doctrines, which often prioritized traditional engagements and established protocols over innovative, adaptive strategies. Semenov's words reveal a deep understanding that the struggle was not merely one of technology or numerical superiority, but fundamentally a clash of strategic philosophies. The enemy's Wolfpack tactics exploited weaknesses inherent in the conventional approaches, compelling a radical reevaluation of how naval battles should be fought. This internal struggle for a new paradigm, a desperate search for an answer to an increasingly lethal threat, set the perfect, albeit grim, backdrop for the emergence of a commander willing to challenge every tenet of traditional naval warfare, thereby forging the forbidden tactic out of sheer necessity and an audacious will to survive and prevail. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Tactic. Desperation as the Mother of Innovation. This chapter delves into the historical context and the pressing circumstances that compelled a certain commander to develop his profoundly radical and ultimately groundbreaking methodology. It explores the environmental and strategic pressures that led to such an unconventional approach, revealing how moments of extreme adversity can serve as fertile ground for revolutionary thinking in warfare. The narrative focuses on the specific events and systemic failures that necessitated a complete overhaul of established naval practices, setting the stage for the emergence of the forbidden tactic. The spring of 1942 marked a catastrophic turning point, an event etched into naval history as Operation Crossroads. This ill-fated mission involved a convoy of 7 vital transport ships, heavily laden with critical supplies, under the protective escort of 2 cruisers. Despite the presence of these formidable escorts, the convoy was almost entirely annihilated during a devastating nocturnal attack by 4 enemy destroyers. The ferocity and efficiency of the assault were staggering. The attacking destroyers vanished into the darkness after their strike, sustaining no reported damage themselves. This incident was not merely a defeat. It was a profound, strategic inflection point. It exposed a glaring vulnerability in existing naval doctrine and served as an undeniable, chilling testament to the overwhelming effectiveness of enemy destroyer tactics, which, by this stage of the war, had become increasingly sophisticated and deadly. The scale of the loss at Operation Crossroads underscored a critical operational failure and propelled the need for an immediate and drastic reevaluation of naval defensive and offensive strategies. At this juncture, the prevailing naval doctrine unequivocally prescribed an active and aggressive approach, the swift search for and immediate destruction of enemy forces, primarily utilizing the combined capabilities of patrol cruisers and extensive air reconnaissance. This strategy was based on the premise that overwhelming force, when applied decisively, would deter or eliminate threats. However, the realities of wartime technology and operational limitations frequently undermined this ideal. The radar systems available at that time were inherently imperfect. Their capabilities were often limited by range, environmental conditions, and the nascent stage of their development, making reliable long-range detection of small, fast-moving vessels like destroyers a significant challenge. Furthermore, aerial reconnaissance, while powerful in theory, was heavily dependent on prevailing weather conditions. Fog, low clouds, storms, and even the natural darkness of night severely hampered the effectiveness of air patrols, rendering them unreliable at crucial moments when enemy destroyers were most likely to strike. These technological and environmental constraints meant that the active search and destroy doctrine, while noble in its intent, often struggled to achieve its objectives, leaving convoys and fleets vulnerable to unseen and unexpected attacks. It was against this backdrop of repeated failures and mounting losses that the forbidden commander, who historical accounts suggest was Captain Second Rank Alexey Volkov, came to a profound and radical realization. He understood that the conventional approach of attempting to pursue and engage an elusive shadow was fundamentally futile. The enemy's destroyers were too fast, too adept at concealment, and too skilled at leveraging the elements of surprise and darkness to be effectively hunted down by traditional means. Volkov's strategic epiphany was revolutionary. Rather than expending precious resources in a fruitless chase, the solution lay in reversing the roles. One must cease to be the hunter constantly in pursuit and instead become the shadow oneself, allowing the enemy to unknowingly come within striking distance. This conceptual shift was a complete departure from the prevailing aggressive doctrines and marked the intellectual birth of his forbidden tactic. It was an embrace of patience, stealth, and calculated ambush over relentless pursuit, a paradigm shift that sought to turn the hunter into the hunted by leveraging the very elements that traditionally aided the enemy. Initially, Captain Volkov's detailed reports outlining his groundbreaking tactic were met with severe disapproval and outright rejection from the higher echelons of the naval staff. These reports were repeatedly returned from headquarters, often stamped with blunt, unequivocal resolutions such as, "Does not conform to combat regulations. Cease unauthorized actions." This resistance was deeply rooted in the rigid adherence to established naval doctrine and the strong emphasis on proactive, aggressive engagement that characterized military thinking of the era. Volkov's proposals for radical passivity, prolonged waiting, and a focus on ambush over active pursuit were seen not merely as unorthodox, but as a dangerous deviation from sanctioned procedures and a form of insubordination. The concept of intentionally placing a ship in a seemingly vulnerable, inactive position for an extended period, rather than aggressively seeking out the enemy, was anathema to the command structure. This initial, stern rejection highlights the immense institutional inertia that innovative ideas often face, particularly in conservative military organizations, underscoring the formidable challenge Volkov faced in advocating for a strategy that seemed to defy every conventional rule of naval warfare. Chapter 2: Anatomy of the Forbidden Maneuver. The Three Pillars of the Killer. This chapter forms the technical core of the article, meticulously dissecting and detailing the constituent elements of the forbidden tactic. It provides an in-depth exploration of the three fundamental principles that underpin this revolutionary approach to naval warfare, explaining how each component worked in concert to achieve unprecedented success against enemy destroyers. The focus here is on the precise mechanics and strategic rationale behind each pillar, illustrating their critical role in transforming a seemingly passive stance into a deadly, overwhelming offensive. Fact 1: Radical passivity and patience. The first and arguably most counterintuitive principle of the forbidden tactic was its radical embrace of passivity and an almost inhuman level of patience. Under this doctrine, a ship would meticulously select and then occupy a designated position, often for weeks on end, along the enemy's frequently used shipping lanes or patrol routes. During this prolonged period, the vessel would meticulously mimic a state of either mechanical malfunction or simply appear as an innocuous, empty space on the vast ocean. Every effort was made to blend into the environment, to become an indistinguishable part of the maritime background. Crucially, the use of radar and active sonar systems was strictly forbidden. These instruments, designed for detection, also emitted signals that could betray the ship's presence to an alert enemy. The concept was to remain utterly silent and invisible, allowing the enemy to approach, confident in their own security, without any indication of a lurking threat. This demanded extraordinary discipline and nerve from the entire crew, transforming the ship into a silent, inanimate object awaiting the opportune moment. The almost absurd degree of patience required by this tactic led to an anecdote that circulated widely among the crews, illustrating both the humor and the underlying tension of their operations. The story goes that a young, perhaps inexperienced, sailor once cautiously inquired of Commander Volkov, "Comrade Commander, what will we do if they never arrive?" The sheer audacity of waiting for an indefinite period, in complete radio silence and darkness, weighed heavily on the minds of the crew. Volkov's purported response perfectly encapsulated the strategic depth of his approach. "Then we have already accomplished our mission. We have forced them to fear this section of the sea." This retort, whether apocryphal or not, served as a powerful lesson. It revealed that even the act of waiting, of merely existing as a potential unseen threat, could instill enough fear and uncertainty to disrupt enemy movements and achieve a strategic objective without firing a single shot. It highlighted the psychological warfare inherent in the forbidden tactic, demonstrating that its effectiveness extended beyond direct combat. Fact 2: The ambush predator tactic. The second pillar of the forbidden tactic involved an exquisite understanding and application of the ambush predator strategy. The selection of the ship's position was elevated to a precise science, a critical decision that determined the success or failure of the entire operation. These carefully chosen locations were not random. They were specific geographical and environmental zones known for their ability to provide natural concealment and interfere with enemy detection systems. Prime ambush spots included areas of deep acoustic shadow, often found at the foot of submerged cliffs or underwater formations that deflected or absorbed sonar waves, rendering the ship acoustically invisible. The edges of dense fog banks were also highly prized, offering visual obscurity that could deceive visual and even rudimentary radar detection. Furthermore, regions with strong magnetic anomalies were exploited, as these natural phenomena could disrupt the sensitive magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD, used by some aircraft and ships, adding another layer of invisibility. This meticulous geological and meteorological reconnaissance ensured that the lurking vessel was not merely hidden, but virtually undetectable until the very last critical moment. A vivid artistic sketch helps to illustrate the terrifying efficacy of this pillar. Imagine an enemy destroyer, perhaps the Gromoboy, steaming at full speed, its crew confident in their security and the perceived emptiness of the surrounding waters. Its hydroacoustic operator, diligently monitoring his instruments, reports what he believes to be unidentified noises, probably a school of fish. The simplicity of this report belies its profound, fatal error. These fish were, in fact, the silent, waiting, forbidden ship, now perfectly positioned and utterly undetected. For the unsuspecting crew of the Gromoboy, their lives were about to be abruptly and violently cut short. They had, unbeknownst to them, only 3 minutes left before the fish would unleash their deadly, unseen strike. This grim scenario underscores the terrifying effectiveness of the ambush predator tactic, turning the enemy's presumed safety into a fatal trap. Fact 3. The single-shot principle. The third and arguably most destructive pillar was the rigid adherence to the single-shot principle. This doctrine dictated that the entirety of the ship's offensive firepower, primarily its torpedoes, was to be meticulously programmed and prepared for one, and only one, initial, overwhelming salvo. There was no room for error, no opportunity for follow-up shots in the heat of a prolonged engagement. The calculations for range, speed, and trajectory were rehearsed and refined to an automatic, instinctive level by the torpedo crews. Their training was exhaustive, focusing on absolute precision and instantaneous execution. The ultimate objective was not to spread fire over a wide area, hoping to hit multiple targets, nor was it to engage in a protracted battle of attrition. Instead, the singular, unwavering goal was to guarantee the assured destruction of one specific pre-identified key target within the enemy formation. This target was often the enemy flagship, an intelligence-gathering vessel, or a critical escort ship whose elimination would sow maximum chaos and disorientation. Commander Volkov, in a preserved memo attributed to him, succinctly articulated the strategic rationale behind this principle. One precise shot is worth 10 inaccurate ones. Panic in the enemy pack is your main weapon after torpedoes. This quote reveals a profound understanding of the psychological dimension of naval warfare. The goal was not merely to sink a ship, but to shatter the enemy's cohesion and morale with a sudden, overwhelming, and inexplicable blow. A single, perfectly executed torpedo strike on a key target, appearing from nowhere, would trigger immediate panic and confusion among the remaining enemy ships. This disarray, born of fear and uncertainty, would then become a force multiplier, making the remaining vessels vulnerable to further tactical maneuvers or even leading to friendly fire incidents or collisions as they desperately attempted to ascertain the threat and escape. The single-shot principle, therefore, was not just about destructive power. It was about unleashing a wave of psychological terror that would effectively dismantle the enemy's fighting capability without the need for a protracted, resource-intensive engagement. Chapter 3: The Human Factor. Steel and Nerves. This chapter is dedicated to exploring the profound psychological dimension of the forbidden tactic and revealing the little-known, often extreme details of the crew's preparation. It delves into how the demanding operational requirements of radical stealth and prolonged waiting imposed immense mental and emotional burdens on every sailor, transforming the selection and training of the crew into a rigorous process that prioritized psychological resilience over mere physical prowess. The focus here is on the human element, the extraordinary discipline, and the sheer mental fortitude required to execute a strategy that pushed the boundaries of conventional naval warfare and human endurance. A little-known fact that vividly illustrates the commander's relentless pursuit of ultimate stealth and quiet involved a series of unprecedented modifications to the ship itself. By personal order of the commander, seemingly innocuous and even essential pieces of equipment were systematically removed from the vessel. This included the ventilation fans from the mess hall, superfluous refrigerators that hummed quietly in the background, and even a portion of the generators that powered non-essential domestic needs. Every single piece of equipment that generated even the slightest amount of noise or vibration, no matter how minor, was scrutinized and, if deemed non-critical for survival or combat, was either deactivated or entirely dismantled. The objective was to achieve an unparalleled level of acoustic silence. Consequently, the noise level of the ship when operating in ambush mode was astonishingly low, comparable to the faint, almost imperceptible hum of a small trawler. This radical reduction in the ship's acoustic signature was not just a technical detail. It represented a fundamental re-engineering of the vessel to serve as a silent, invisible hunter, demanding an equally profound psychological adaptation from its crew. Whispers among the naval community further underscored the extreme measures taken to maintain absolute stealth. It was said that Commander Volkov's crew could communicate for weeks on end solely through whispers and a highly developed system of prearranged gestures. This wasn't merely a matter of courtesy. It was a survival imperative, ensuring that no stray sound could betray their presence to an enemy listening with sensitive hydrophones. Their training extended beyond conventional naval drills. They were meticulously taught to distinguish the subtle differences in the propeller noises of various enemy ship types. This highly specialized skill allowed them to identify approaching vessels by their distinct acoustic signatures, providing crucial intelligence without ever having to activate their own active sonar. This level of sensory awareness and self-imposed discipline fostered an almost preternatural connection between the crew and their environment, turning every sailor into a finely tuned instrument of detection and silence. The psychological toll on the crew operating under such conditions was nothing short of extreme, pushing human endurance to its absolute limits. Not every sailor possessed the inherent psychological fortitude to withstand the profound strain of multi-day waits, often in complete darkness, with minimal sound, and the chilling, ever-present knowledge that death could strike with terrifying suddenness at any given second. The isolation, the constant vigilance, the suppression of normal human communication, and the sheer uncertainty of when, or if, the enemy would appear created an almost unbearable mental burden. This environment was not merely physically demanding. It was a crucible for the mind, testing the very limits of sanity and resolve. Therefore, the selection process for Volkov's crews was not primarily based on physical strength or conventional naval aptitude. Instead, it became a rigorous, informal selection for those with ironclad nerves, individuals capable of enduring prolonged periods of intense psychological pressure, unwavering focus, and an almost monastic discipline of silence and patience. This was a war fought as much with mental resilience as with steel and torpedoes. A poignant entry from the diary of a chief petty officer, second class, aboard the destroyer Smerch, starkly illustrates this immense psychological burden. He wrote, The most terrible enemy in such an operation is not the adversary beyond the horizon, but the silence in your own ears. This deeply personal reflection captures the agonizing reality of life aboard a forbidden ship. The relentless, all-encompassing silence, while tactically essential, became a psychological tormentor. In the absence of external stimuli, the human mind is prone to amplify internal anxieties, fears, and doubts. The constant anticipation of a sudden, violent engagement, coupled with the profound quiet, could create an almost maddening internal landscape. This quote not only highlights the unique mental challenges faced by the crew, but also underscores the commander's understanding that to master the external enemy, one first had to master the internal battles waged within the minds of his men. The forbidden tactic demanded not just a new way of fighting, but a new kind of warrior, one whose most formidable weapon was the unyielding strength of their nerves. Chapter 4: Triumph and Prohibition. The Price of Victory. This chapter recounts the remarkable successes achieved through the implementation of the forbidden tactic and then delves into the paradoxical decision by the High Command to ultimately prohibit its further use. It explores the reasons behind this seemingly contradictory action, examining the conflict between undeniable military effectiveness and the broader, often unwritten, rules and perceptions of wartime heroism and strategy. The focus is on the tactical triumphs, the subsequent debate, and the complex factors that led to the suppression of a winning strategy. A truly definitive and illustrative incident showcasing the devastating effectiveness of the forbidden tactic occurred in July 1944, during a fierce engagement near Cape Despair. Commander Volkov's destroyer had maintained its position in ambush for an astonishing 5 continuous days, a testament to the radical passivity and patience that characterized his strategy. When the opportunity finally presented itself, the forbidden ship unleashed a single, sudden, and perfectly coordinated salvo of torpedoes. This unexpected strike, emerging from seemingly nowhere, found its mark with deadly precision, sending the enemy flagship destroyer, the Blitz, to the bottom of the sea in a matter of minutes. The impact of this sudden, inexplicable loss on the remaining 3 enemy ships was immediate and catastrophic. Disoriented and utterly bewildered, with no understanding of where the attack had originated, the surviving vessels were thrown into a state of utter panic. In their desperate attempts to evade the unseen threat and establish some semblance of order, they collided with each other, further compounding the chaos and disarray. This engagement at Cape Despair was an impeccable and devastating demonstration of the tactic's core principles: absolute stealth, overwhelming surprise, and the psychological warfare unleashed by the single-shot principle. It epitomized the ideal execution of the forbidden tactic, showcasing its ability to neutralize a numerically superior enemy force with minimal risk to the attacking vessel. By the close of 1944, the cumulative achievements attributed to the forbidden tactic were nothing short of extraordinary. Records indicated more than 20 confirmed victories over enemy destroyers. What made this track record particularly remarkable and virtually unprecedented was that these successes were achieved with 0 losses incurred by the forbidden ships themselves. This statistical anomaly presented an undeniable, irrefutable argument for the tactic's operational brilliance and efficiency. The ability to consistently destroy enemy assets without suffering any attrition in return was a military feat almost unheard of in the brutal realities of naval warfare. The numbers spoke for themselves, painting a clear picture of a highly effective and innovative strategy that consistently delivered decisive results where conventional methods often faltered. The 20-plus confirmed victories against enemy destroyers stood as a powerful testament to the revolutionary potential of Commander Volkov's approach, demonstrating its capacity to shift the balance of power on the seas. Despite its undeniable and proven effectiveness, the High Command found itself in a profound and complex dilemma regarding the forbidden tactic. While the strategy worked brilliantly, consistently delivering victories with 0 losses, it was paradoxically perceived as unheroic. This perception stemmed from its radical departure from the romanticized ideals of direct, aggressive engagement and chivalrous combat that often permeated military culture. The tactic relied on stealth, patience, and a cold, calculated ambush rather than the glorious, open-sea battles favored in traditional narratives of naval heroism. It did not fit into the triumphant, parade-like imagery of advancing forces and decisive, visible victories that the command structure sought to project, especially during a period of intense national struggle. The very nature of the forbidden tactic, which minimized direct confrontation and maximized unseen, sudden destruction, clashed with the prevailing notions of valor and martial glory. This created a significant internal conflict for the leadership. How to reconcile undeniable success with a method that did not conform to the accepted heroic narrative of warfare. The official reason provided for the eventual prohibition of the forbidden tactic was cited as unjustifiable risk and passivity. This rationale, however, was widely regarded as a convenient, face-saving explanation. Unofficially, whispers and rumors circulated extensively among naval personnel and within military circles, suggesting a deeper, more unsettling truth behind the command's decision. It was widely believed that the admirals were profoundly disturbed and even frightened by the moral implications of the tactic. The forbidden approach, with its reliance on prolonged, silent waiting and then a sudden, overwhelming strike, transformed warfare into a cold, almost detached execution, leaving no room for what was perceived as chivalry or providing the enemy with any chance to fight back honorably. This calculated, almost surgical elimination of an unsuspecting foe deeply troubled those who held to older, more romanticized ideals of combat. The tactic was too efficient, too clinical, and, in a disturbing way, too terrifying. The unspoken fear was that embracing such a ruthless, purely utilitarian approach might fundamentally alter the moral fabric of the Navy itself, blurring the lines between combat and calculated assassination, and stripping away the vestiges of heroic struggle that define their image. Conclusion: the legacy of the Gray Ghost. This concluding section summarizes the enduring impact of Commander Volkov's forbidden tactic, detailing its surprising post-war trajectory and its profound, albeit often covert, influence on modern naval art. It brings together the various threads of the narrative, underscoring the timeless lessons learned from this unconventional approach to warfare and reflecting on the ultimate price and power of thinking beyond established norms. The focus is on the enduring strategic legacy and the philosophical implications of defying conventional military wisdom. Despite its remarkable wartime successes, the tactic developed by Captain Volkov did not find its way into open, public military textbooks after the war. The official historical narratives and instructional materials largely omitted its specific methods and principles, reflecting the earlier discomfort and formal prohibition by the High Command. However, beneath the surface of official silence, the true impact of his work began to manifest. While not openly celebrated or formally codified for general naval forces, the core principles of his approach were subjected to intense and thorough study by military strategists and analysts. These meticulously examined principles subsequently formed the foundational basis for the doctrines of entirely different branches of military operations, specifically modern submarine warfare and the increasingly crucial realm of special forces. The emphasis on radical stealth, prolonged undetected presence, precise targeting, and the psychological impact of a sudden, overwhelming strike were perfectly suited to the evolving needs of these specialized units, ensuring that the essence of Volkov's genius lived on, albeit in a transformed and often classified capacity. The compelling story of the forbidden commander stands as a timeless and invaluable lesson that extends far beyond the specific confines of naval warfare. It powerfully illustrates that victory in conflict is not solely the product of superior technology or numerical advantage, but is also, and often more crucially, born from unconventional, nonlinear thinking. It demonstrates that sometimes the most dangerous adversary is not the one with the biggest guns or the most ships, but rather the one who fundamentally refuses to engage according to the established rules and expectations. This interpretation highlights a critical strategic insight. Innovation and adaptive intelligence can triumph over brute force, especially when coupled with a willingness to challenge deeply ingrained assumptions. The legacy of the forbidden tactic teaches that rigid adherence to dogma can be a greater weakness than any technological deficit, and that true genius in warfare often lies in the ability to transcend conventional boundaries and reimagine the very nature of conflict. Military historian Dr. Petr Ignatiev offers a particularly incisive and thought-provoking analysis regarding the suppression of Volkov's tactic, eloquently summarizing its profound significance. They banned his tactic because it was too effective and too terrifying. They feared not him, but what every commander would understand. To win, sometimes you have to stop being an exemplary soldier and become a hunter. This powerful quote cuts to the heart of the matter, suggesting that the fear was not merely of the tactic's ruthlessness, but of the radical mental shift it demanded from military leaders. It implies that the high command was less concerned with the tactical efficacy and more with the potential for a paradigm shift in military ethos, a shift from a structured, rule-bound approach to a more primal, instinctual, and morally ambiguous form of warfare. The true terror, in Ignatiev's view, lay in the realization that victory sometimes required shedding the veneer of exemplary conduct and embracing the colder, more detached, yet ultimately more effective mindset of a predator. This fear of a fundamental change in military identity and the uncomfortable implications for traditional heroism ultimately led to the tactic's official ban, even as its principles secretly reshaped future military strategies. And so, even today, the echoes of the forbidden tactic resonate within the hushed corridors of modern military training centers. Future commanders of sophisticated submarine cruisers are instilled with a fundamental principle. Your task is not to seek battle. Your task is to be a shadow, to be silence, and to remember that one patient shot decides more than 10 thoughtless ones. This instruction, steeped in the philosophy of Volkov, is a direct inheritance from the Grey Ghost's audacious approach. It emphasizes the enduring importance of stealth, the overwhelming power of surprise, and the strategic superiority of a single, perfectly executed strike born of meticulous patience. The spirit of the forbidden tactic lives on in every lesson learned about covert operations, strategic patience, and the devastating impact of unexpected, decisive action. It serves as a permanent reminder that true mastery in warfare often lies in the ability to disappear, to wait, and to strike with unparalleled precision, transforming the unseen into the ultimate weapon.